You're online. Kyle, please start.
Good day, everybody. I'm Kyle Ellicott, your host for VCTV, as well as co-founder to Topio Networks and partner at Intersect VC, among many other activities that I do. But today, we're going to be hosting a very exciting episode here on VCTV, and that is a discussion with some outstanding founders and investors about what's leading and changing innovation around technology and venture capital globally. And here on VCTV, as you know, we cover a variety of topics, industries, and trends on what's happening around the world, where these industries are crossing over each other, what's happening, what's not happening, where the opportunities are, where the money's going, where the money's not going. But today, we're going down to the founder level. And today, we're all sitting around this table to talk as founders what is happening from these areas, which I think will be a very exciting discussion, and a little bit different angle than our typical shows here on VCTV. But I don't want to take away from our panelists. So real quick, audience, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to drop them in the box, click the subscribe button, or give us a thumbs up if you like what you hear. If you'd like to be on the show as a founder, reach out to Elena, the LA Token team, or myself, and we'll see how we can get you a part of this. And a big shout out to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for making VCTV possible to your screen everywhere in the world. And to our panelists, gentlemen, welcome. We had an amazing off show behind camera, which I will tease out. We talked about all kinds of fun facts, little things that are happening in our variety of cities. We'll see if we get to some of that here on the show today. But without further ado, Joran, I'd love to welcome you to the show. If you can, a little introduction about yourself and a little background as well.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. So thanks for having me. My name is Joran de Vachter. I'm based in Brussels. My main activity at the moment is I'm CEO of a company called Seeds.io, which is a tech scale-up. We provide a solution that allows people to select seats when they buy tickets for events. So heavily impacted by COVID-19. Other than that, I've been involved in a number of startups where I've been participating either as an investor or as a founder myself. That's the main thing, really. You're on mute, Kyle.
Wonderful. We're definitely, yes. It's usually my first rule in every episode of VCTV, and I'm usually the first to break it. So there we go. Mute when you're not talking, unmute when you are talking. I'm the first to fail. But we're going to definitely come back to that. I want to get into how the past 6 months has really impacted your business, but then also what are you looking at going forward? As later today, we're going to be talking about virtual reality and artificial intelligence and how that's changing various industries. I know on the event side, there's a lot of activity. So excited to dive into that for you. Nicholas, welcome to the show, and a little background on yourself as well.
Thank you very much. So I'm calling from Singapore, so it's dark in this side of the world. I'm French. I have been, since 3 years, I'm running a company called Positive Energy, and Positive Energy aims to facilitate the financing and the investment in renewable energy projects, mainly focusing in emerging markets. So we help people who want to build solar farm, biomass, waste to energy to access capital when they need it to build their power plant. Very exciting to attend this event and to join the conversation. And I hope I can get some insight of what's happening in the energy space and in this part of the world, in Singapore. That would be looking forward.
Absolutely. Get ready. We're coming back on that. Peter, last but not least, welcome to the show. Welcome back. Actually, we've had an episode of VCTV together, and would love everyone to have the chance to hear a little bit more about your background as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. Thanks for having me back. So my name is Peter Vogel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company in the cannabis space called LeafWire. And we have created LeafWire to essentially be the LinkedIn for cannabis. So we are a business networking platform, just like LinkedIn, but we're 100% built for cannabis and hemp communities. And we're the largest business network in cannabis in the world. We have about 35,000 members who created profiles. We represent about 14,000 companies. and we've been going now for about 3 years, but the site's actually been live for, closer to about 2, but we've definitely seen, there's been a lot of things changing over the last 6 months. So I think we have a lot to share. The cannabis space has been especially kind of impacted and changed over the last 6 months.
Absolutely. So let's dive in right there. I mean, all three of you, before we get into some of the questions that we were talking about off camera and kind of how things are shifting, let's go into each of your markets. So cannabis, energy, events. Let's start with cannabis. I mean, where are things at? How have things really been impacted, or what's going on in the cannabis industry right now? As I myself, it's something that I follow from an investment side, but also from a founder side. And there's the best of both worlds, I would say, but also some changes, some ups and downs. So what are you seeing in this space that's happening right now?
I think change is probably the key term there, and it's, like you said, a lot of ups and downs. There are a lot of companies that are seeing, the most sales they've ever seen. Some states are seeing higher sales than they've ever seen. You're also seeing right now a ton of the public companies out there. Like you read about Canopy and Acreage and a bunch of these other ones, their stocks are getting hammered. They're all running out of money. High Times, for example, also just got cited by the SEC. They didn't file a report, but they've been doing a crowdfunding campaign, apparently illegally. So you have a lot of changes in that. Now curbside pickups allowed, deliveries being allowed by lots of places. All the dispensaries changed to social distancing inside. But then you have private markets are still tanking in terms of fundraising is super tough for private. The public companies are having trouble, and then some companies are doing amazing. So it's kind of all across the board. And I'm happy to jump into if we want to get into any of those specific areas, but it's a really kind of tumultuous time. There's a lot of companies that are laying people off, going out of business, and some that are booming. So it's kind of complicated.
So let's uncomplicate it. What's the difference between those that are thriving and those that are dying, or struggling, I should say, in this kind of market? Because for those that don't know, in the news, you can see tons of facts about this, of where cannabis of all different areas, which I'll leave to the expert Peter here to diverge into, but there's a surge of use, but then there's also a very change in the types of products that are being used or not. Right. But from the company level, why are some of these thriving and why are some of these struggling?
I think the ones that are thriving are the ones that were already established enough and already had built out sales channels and already had consistent revenue and weren't necessarily reliant on continued funding. A lot of the ones that are struggling are the newer companies who had just raised some money, had just hired 20, 30, 50 people, were establishing their product market fit, and were kind of getting customers. And then when this hit, a lot of people pulled back and stopped spending money on everything, except for actual people buying product. People still buy cannabis. People still go buy alcohol. People still go buy food. But some of the extra things, maybe advertising, technology, some brand new equipment, a bunch of those sorts of things are expenses that can get put off for 6 months. So I think a lot of companies that were in the earlier stages that are building, that were getting to profitability, their funding dried up. And whereas they expected to continued to be getting funding ongoing, that stopped, and they weren't established enough to survive as they were. They had to either lay off a ton of people, or some of those companies are just gone now. So I think it had to do the stage at which companies were when this happened, because it was obviously pretty unexpected. Most companies coming into January thought, we're going to continue. If you raised $1 million or $2 million or $5 million the previous year, you figured you'll be able to keep raising money. So you keep running your business as normal, and then all of a sudden that faucet gets shut off. And if you're not established enough, you start to feel it pretty quickly.
And are you seeing anything change around the supply or regulation side? Is that having an impact, or is it mostly just the last 6 months that really impacted some of these businesses and their future going ahead? Or is supply and regulation still kind of an issue? And again, for those that may be listening, an oversupply in some cases, where we're just growing too much. And then regulation, where state by state here in the United States, and then also globally, country by country, there's various regulations that are changing very rapidly, but some of it's still unclear and backlogged, et cetera. So, to you, Peter.
Yeah. So to take a look at that regulation side first, the changing regulations has started, and that's benefited a bunch of the dispensaries that can now do curbside sales, or a bunch of delivery is now allowed in a bunch of areas. So companies could actually almost start new businesses. So the changing regulations that happen quickly have helped a bunch of people, but that's not true across the board. So in Massachusetts, they were one of the only states that did not make adult use or recreational actually they didn't deem that essential. So almost every other state where it was legal deemed it essential and let the dispensary stay open. Massachusetts didn't. So the other regulations that will be changing will help a lot of people. And most people believe all of the states in the US, and I realize worldwide as well, are hurting for tax revenue and are seeing huge deficits. And one of the ways almost every state is looking at how can I dig out of this is by making either medical marijuana legal or adult use legal. So I think you're going to see a huge movement as COVID keeps going on. And obviously none of us know how long this will happen. And it obviously doesn't appear like the US is doing that amazing a job of shortening this at all. But I think you're going to see more and more states push legislation to legalize just because they're desperate. They're out of money. They can't fund it. They're cutting school budgets. They're firing workers. So, they can solve partly by getting revenues from, millions and millions of dollars of cannabis sales. So I think you're going to see that biggest change over the next 6 months to a year. That's going to make a huge impact, I think, on our economy.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, which actually could rapidly progress an industry that was already progressing, right? I mean, we could see that change very dramatically in 2020. And on the flip side, I want to switch gears over to Joran for just a moment, and we'll come to Nicholas and then Ishmael here in just a short bit around the energy and blockchain sectors, which are also booming. But Joran, I mean, you're in an industry, and again, I'm very familiar with this from my history in the entertainment industry, but then also running conferences. I mean, the events business is a special business on its own. But right now, I mean, I just kind of want to turn it over to you. What's going on? How are you feeling? What's shifting? What's changing? If you just need to vent, just vent. I mean, there's a lot that's happened in this space. That's kind of probably changed your way of business.
We hit the panic button somewhere in March, and it's been long since. So that's no longer, I appreciate the opportunity, but it's no longer necessary. So what we've seen is, we're not in the conference event sector. We're much more into the theaters, sports, and all those kinds of things. What we've seen is a drop in usage between February and April of about 95%. And it's now slowly coming back. We're now around 25-30%. But what we see is that with events starting to opening up, is that COVID-19 is like waiting behind the corner every time there is the rules are relaxed, and then we see that cases go up again. So it may be a while before things will really be back to normal. There's I think it's West End, London West End is not going to reopen until somewhere next year. The same is true for New York. They say that it's not going to open until September 2021. Now these are the big money spinners because they also depend on travel and on tourists, et cetera, et cetera. So same is true for sports. We don't know when sports will start to reopen again. So there's an enormous amount of uncertainty. That's the first thing, is like there's been a big hit to the sector. and there is still a lot of uncertainty. Anybody who is making real planning and has real numbers for what's going to happen in October or December is either an optimist or a fool or a pessimist or all of those together. So we don't know what's going to happen, and unfortunately we do live in interesting times. That being said, there is a couple of things that I see already emerging in the industry. So the first one is that cash is king. Everybody who has got cash is better off than those who have to rely on investors or future funding. The second is that there is some kind of, some people, some businesses will disappear, but I think actually less than people think, because a lot of the event sector deals with long-term contracts and long-term relationships. And so it's not that easy always to change things immediately. So everybody's kind of like waiting to see what's going to happen and hoping that they can sit it out. And for some of them, and I think for a lot of them, this will actually be true. The third thing I think in terms of how we deal with this with the audience at large is the key factor in bringing this all back is trust. We will have to rebuild trust with people to go to the theater, to go to the cinema, to go to a performance, to go to a gig, to go to a match. Why? And it's not just trust in terms of I can go to this. I mean, there's been a lot of surveys in the industry and everybody says like, I would love to go back, but I'm not sure I will bring my children or bring my, when I come back that, my aunt, she's a risk person, so I may not go, Those things are important. So one of the things that we've seen is that social distancing and applying the rules is very important. And so one of my takes on these things is that humans are social animals. We don't act in our rational self-interest. We're not amoral, asocial beings. We are social beings. And so what we do is we look after each other. And this crisis has shown that we're very good at looking after each other. And if we have the right structures to do that. And so building trust back again to people to say, you can come to our event. It's going to be safe. There will be an empty seat next to you. And you see technology acting on that. You see digitization by people doing virtual meetings, and a lot of virtual activity is taking place, but it's not the same. People still want to go to events. They want to see other people. They want to live life in real time. But in order to do that, in order to lower that threshold back again, we need to build trust. And the way to build trust is to provide technological solutions to people to say, you will be safe in our event. You will be safe where you will be sitting with us. And I think that's happening at the moment.
And is that something you're taking on your shoulders as a founder? I mean, is that going to be a part of your business model going forward? Or is that something you see that will be on the venue side?
It's something that we have a specific niche business where we allow people to select the tickets. Select the seats, not tickets. So our customers are ticketing technology businesses. And so when people select the seat, we now have a feature where we can show that there's not going to be somebody sitting next to them. And we see that has tremendous success within our business, that a lot of our customers are very grateful for this. They say this will allow us to go back to market 1, 2, 3 months earlier, which may make the difference between living or not living. And so we do see that there is you need to provide that technological solution, and this is something that we have done. I think one of the first in the industry, and certainly in my modest view, the best way that I've been able to see so far, to get to a solution to that. And that being said, we do see people going back to events. We see it crawling back to 30%, and I hope September. Back in May, we were sitting together with a couple of customers, and we were saying, what's going to happen, and the general consensus was that by September we would be back at 50% of activity, which is not enough, but and we're all praying for a vaccine on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I mean, going forward, so let's talk a little bit about 2021. I mean, you've seen now kind of what changes or pivots you've had to make for this year, and it sounds like you're rapidly adopting. As you look ahead to the year, in 2021, do you see any other technologies or any other means to further progress the events or ticketing businesses as it goes.
Well, I think the virtual reality will definitely make inroads, but I think what people don't necessarily realize is that virtual reality will never replace actual events. It's going to build a different market and a different sector of virtual events, because virtuality will offer things that real life can't offer, but it will miss things that real life offers. And so it's not going to be an either or situation. It's going to be in addition to and in a different way. But I think virtuality and digitalization of events is definitely going to, have a big jumpstart, but it's still, I think it was Napoleon who said that strategy and tactics for the amateurs and the professionals do logistics. So it's a logistical question, as always. Can we get the infrastructure there? Can we get the software out there in time for people to have that virtualization? Because you may have the best virtual reality glasses. If you can't connect them in a way that you don't have a 3-second lag every 10 seconds, it's worthless.
Right. Well, this is a very interesting comparison to Peter as well, because in the cannabis space, I mean, this is something that, we saw, I would say, change very, very quickly. I mean, there were some struggles, and then all of a sudden, very, very rapidly, we saw an open progression there. But in the events industry, you're bringing up a good point, is there are things that are going to be missed in difference between virtual and physical, and the infrastructure is just, it's just not there yet. I mean, I'll be the first to call it out, and I'm going to be talking about it in another hour here, and have been studying it myself. But it's the infrastructure, technology wise, we're just not there, right? We're just not capable yet, and the cost is still a little high. There's still a little friction to be able to enter that, but that's not to say that people aren't trying. I think Travis Scott is doing a concert with Wear VR, which will be having, one of the first big time virtual conferences or concerts that's 100% virtual, not necessarily just a Zoom or an online tune in. Is this something your business might get into? Are you guys thinking about how you might get into that with some of your customers right now? Is this something of interest that might be a pivot for you guys?
So there's two things we're seeing. One is that we've seen that a lot of people have now approached us during this crisis to start using us, and we expect that by next year we will have a significantly higher number of customers doing much larger volumes. That's the first thing that we see, is that actually people see that seating is becoming more important rather than less important in this whole story. But the second thing is that we have some prospects who are looking at startup projects where they would allow people with cameras, with 5G infrastructure to virtually be there. And and everybody has their own way of doing it. So these things are happening. Yes, they are happening. But to your point, it's early days, and very often the infrastructure doesn't carry the data. More needs to speed up a little bit, and then we might get somewhere, or we need to find some different way. And this is all infrastructure stuff. This is not something that anybody on the application side can do anything about it, because you're dependent on the infrastructure being there. But the people on the application side, I think, are being creative and are being innovative and trying to do new things.
Absolutely, and
new business models.
Yeah, and absolutely, to that point, Nicholas, I want to come to you next. I mean, infrastructure. This is your world, my friend. I mean, you live and breathe infrastructure. Without you, the rest of us aren't going to be here. So, I mean, infrastructure is the name of the game. You're focused on the energy markets. Tell us what is happening around energy and what's changing, because we know that there's a lot, and I think there's also a lot of talk as well. So set the record straight. What's going on in the energy space that we need to be aware of right now?
I think few people really understand what is happening in the energy world right now. It's a very complex puzzle. So there's few facts that happened in the last month that I think are mind-blowing if you put them together. So first we have the COVID crisis. Everybody knows, understand, lockdown everywhere, billion of people staying at home, factories shutting down. And at the same time, you have the energy industry, who is going through, I think, the biggest crisis of all time. And it's reflected in the price of the oil, who is historically the biggest source of energy for mankind. And the oil barrels has been dropping drastically in the last months. And this is due to the fact that there is no airplanes flying. And so the demand has been going down very quickly. And at the same time, geopolitical war started between different nations, the US, Middle East, Russia, China. And that creates a situation where nobody see a recovery of the oil price for the months to come, for the years to come, until COVID is there. And so the whole energy landscape, where oil was king for many countries and was the mainstream of the energy world, is no more valid. So that's and you take every energy company in the world, I would say 90% of the energy company in the world, they need to process this change, this shift that happened overnight, and understand what does that mean for them in this new world, in this future world, where most likely the oil will remain very low. And so everybody is looking somewhere else to make money and to build energy independence. And that brings us to the world of the clean energy, where I belong to, and I've belonged for many years, who can be seen as some kind of unexpected winner from the crisis. And that has been seen in many countries. At the peak of the crisis, the percentage of clean energy in the different energy market has been growing up drastically. So proportionally, people consume more clean energy than before, proportionally, not in real actual volume, but proportionally. So that's already, I would say, an achievement. But looking forward, when everybody hopes that the world will recover and the economy will recover, the question is what the energy world will look like tomorrow. Will it be still a greener world where there is more and more clean energy that allow us to reduce the emission and fight climate change and global warming? Or we will be tempting to go back to traditional energy, who has been heavily impacted by the crisis, and today where a lot of jobs are on the line. And that's a very strong dilemma on the macroeconomy. So that's the macroeconomy.
Right.
In our activities, we work with people who develop projects, and these people have a number of challenges today. It's very difficult, as you can imagine, to do infrastructure business in time of crisis. There was a number released for Singapore economy, I think today. So the second quarter was minus 41% impact on the GDP, 41%.
Wow.
That's massive. And if you look at some sector like the construction sector, real estate, minus 95%. So it shows that when you have this lockdown and you have the restriction on mobility, on supply chain, on activities, some industry have really hard time to get going. So we see that on some markets and on some of the projects. But at the same time, there is some segments that are underperforming and some segments that become more attractive. And the segments that are becoming very attractive is the distributed power generation. So for example, solar rooftop, because a lot of companies now are trying to go after cost saving. And this project can typically yield good saving for the companies over the long term. And they remain very attractive for the investors that we serve. Because this, when you do invest in a project or solar rooftop on a plant, you don't have to understand what's happened at the macro level. You don't need to understand what will happen with the oil price for the next 20 years. You don't need to understand what is the electricity demand in the country. Is it oversupply, undersupply? You just need to understand, is this plant where I'm installing my solar rooftop will still be in business in the coming years? And there is some industries that we know are not impacted by COVID, and will flourish in the coming years. If you are in the food industry, in the agricultural industry, if you are in some part of the industrial sectors.
Cannabis, potentially.
Cannabis, definitely. You should definitely put solar panel on your cannabis plant rooftop or glass house, definitely. So yeah, that's a lot of things happening right now.
Yeah, so I want to touch on emerging markets for a second. You're based in Singapore. You're focused on emerging markets. I've seen a lot of activity focused around climate change, and there's also a lot of discussion around the impact of energy on climate change and trying to be future forward versus, kind of live in the past. And China, for instance, it's a part of their big 5-year or now coming up new 5-year plan throughout Southeast Asia and even into Australia. This is a huge topic. So from an emerging markets side, how and what is really the impact that you're seeing over the next year? I mean, is this something that is just talk? Are people actually laying the infrastructure and the groundwork to make new energy infrastructure possible? Or is it more, Joran and Peter and myself as founders, is it kind of coming from our direction, or is it from us as investors? Where's that direction coming from, and how things are going in the emerging markets?
Okay. Well, I still think emerging markets are not as progressist as Europe or Australia or the US in the move towards more sustainability, lower emission. Okay, these countries have started. Most of them have started the journey toward renewable energy a bit later, and there is a level of awareness in the need to move towards clean energy. And the benefit of moving toward clean energy is not really there yet. We met still a lot of people who think that renewable energy is not really working. It's an industry that relies heavily on subsidies from government. It's and we don't really relate to the climate change and global warming. So there's still a lot of education and capacity building that needs to happen in the region. But we have seen some countries recently really understand the opportunities that they face and really go drastically in this direction. I can mention, for example, Vietnam, who has been, I would say, one of the stellar countries in the last year. The country has really pushed forward strong regulation and regulatory landscape to promote the investment in renewable energy. They have been really successful. There has been a lot of new solar plants being developed and deployed in Vietnam. And that creates a lot of jobs, a lot of local jobs, and a lot of good things for the economy, while giving the country to have an opportunity to get energy at lower costs. So they are saving, they are doing productivity gain every day, with a big benefit. So we hope that we will see this type of strategy and behavior being adopted in other countries, like big countries like Indonesia, for example, or Philippines, and be able to notice similar momentum in these giants in Asia.
Wonderful. And that brings me to Ishmael. Are you there? Ishmael, are you there? Maybe not. Okay. Well, we were going to go to Ishmael around blockchain as he is one of the co-founders and CEO of Blockchain Labs. So I wanted to kind of bring blockchain into this conversation as, Nicholas, you bring up the word distributed. Both Joran and Peter, your industries are impacted or pushed ahead in some cases around distributed technology and how that plays a role into it. I know in the cannabis space, there's a lot of talk on bringing transparency to the supply chain. A common area we see blockchain technology being applied, but also, and we just lost him, so I'll continue on this for a second. We're also seeing it around the idea of transfers of payment and invoicing, so kind of that future of work, back office, and how those types of things can be handled. And then in Joran, from the event space, I've seen a lot happening in the event space, mostly on the ticketing side, and the idea of validating or verifying the secondary market around tickets. And if they're real or if they're not. And again, holding that one source of truth. And then on the energy market, I mean, Nicholas, I see you smiling there as I mentioned this, but I mean, on the energy market, you know, blockchain and distributed technologies in general has played a very key role in this new infrastructure that's being built for the decades to come around our future of energy. And a lot of it comes in around the idea of, you know, fractionizing the usage and then also giving back some kind of, whether it's a token or some type of reward for energy usage being, you know, carbon friendly or just maybe not using all of your energy. So I'll speak on behalf of the blockchain space for a moment on where this is playing. But Nicholas, do you have anything to add? I saw you put your hand up there. And Jorn, I saw you unmute, so I'll come back as well.
No, I still think blockchain and energy could be a fantastic combination moving forward. You know, the energy market can be quite complex if you look in the developed economy. There is a lot of transactions that happen every day, and there is a lot of contracts that take place every minute in order to ensure that the grid remains stable and can provide electricity to everybody every minute. And this contract and this transaction typically are a very good ground for blockchain to be automated and to do that with a high level of security and transparency. So yeah, I'm very convinced that there will be the big energy network of tomorrow, the big software platforms that run the grid tomorrow will run in some kind of blockchain system.
Well, it crosses over into the Internet of Things, another big area of topic as well, right? The idea of connected devices, and we get into, you know, the bigger picture of smart cities and more sensors being laid out. But I mean, even furthermore, I mean, you know, blockchain plays a role into kind of Peter's world of the future of social network and verification and potentially even identity, and how that may affect the verification of new users, new companies in the cannabis space, and how they are onboarded into his platform. I'm speaking just based on technology and what you guys have told me. So I don't know if these are part of your company plan. So I apologize if I'm revealing something that you already have in the works. But Jorn, I've seen you unmute a few times, and I apologize. I'll turn it over to you.
No, I just wanted to pick up on something that Nicholas said, which was about, you know, productivity growth, and this has been something that I've been very keen to look at, because as you know, in the last 40 years we've seen massive drop in productivity growth. And the only way you can really create wealth and welfare is by growth in productivity. I mean, it's like, and I think it's one of those key aspects where I think, you know, novel technology such as renewables, it's very important to look at those things happening. And I think one of the things that I think that is important is that we think we need a kind of a bit of a different new mindset for the 21st century on how we deal with that kind of productivity growth. Because productivity growth is like, you wouldn't call it the elephant in the room because it's not very big. It's actually too small. It's like the mouse in the room that nobody talks about. But it's a huge problem, because if we don't have productivity growth, we won't be able to continue. And you look at policies and they're basically ignoring it, and it's a matter of enormous concern. And I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to get out of these 20th century frameworks of thinking, like the separation between the state and private sector in terms of who produces more or who does what best. And you look at people writing about it like Mazzucato, who says, well, you know, the state does the heavy lifting in terms of the risk taking, but the private sector then brings it to the users in the most efficient way. Like, you know, where we have to abandon the old ways of thinking where we say, you know, there's a specific, like the role of investors, for example. I think it needs to be questioned. You know, a lot of investors invest in things that are not productive, and how do you make that better? How do you make sure that as a society, I mean, because it's quite obvious that without proper regulation, these things are not going to work. And I think, you know, jumping on that point of productivity, you know, how are we going to make sure that new investment, whether it's from a private or a public sector, actually increases productivity, because we're seeing at the moment, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing actual declines in productivity in a number of countries, and COVID is not going to make that better.
Just to clarify, by productivity, do you mean market growth, or do you mean actual productivity? And
I mean actual productivity, not market growth. Because market growth is just a measure. It's just whatever you want to measure, right?
Sure.
I mean, if I mean actual productivity, wealth creation, which does not come from either investors or it typically doesn't come from investors. And it's one of those things where we need to, as a society, say, jobs are not created by investors. Innovation is not created by investors. Productivity is not created by investors. It's an ecosystem which is much wider than that. And I think one of the key mistakes that we see that we've made over the last 40 years is the financialization of our society, where we've said we need to put shareholders at the top of the chain, not the food chain. And this has been a massive mistake, because coincidentally, with putting shareholders in there, we've seen the collapse of productivity, and we've seen a transmission of a productive version of capitalism into a much more parasitic version of capitalism. And I think we need to move back to a situation where we have high high productivity growth, and our current structure and our current way of thinking, our dogmas, are all wrong.
Nicholas, I see you may have a comment, and Peter, I'll come to you next on something else.
No, I think the comment about productivity is also something I'm really keen about. Maybe not for the same angle, but I remember being quite surprised by the number, about the evolution of the productivity over the years, because I was a bit naive, and I was imagining that with all the digital technologies that we have, and all these fancy tools, and all these innovations that we have put on the market for the last years, the productivity would have increased over the years. We would be able to do more things with less. But it's not the case. The productivity gain are being reducing over time. So I think in one way, it goes a bit in the direction that Joran was mentioning, that there is some kind of flow, underlying flow. And maybe it's because we had to build the infrastructure, because I think the internet revolution is really big. And so first you have to build the internet, and then you have to start to build the tools around the internet. So I'm still an optimist, and I still think the giant productivity gain is ahead of us. And with me, this gain will be able to compensate for the years where we have been underperforming. But okay, maybe I'm an optimist. I think it would be good to work against it and not assume it will happen itself.
I'm sorry to jump into that.
No, go ahead.
I think our main concern is that our tools of analysis are wrong, and our tools of intellectual discourse are primitive today compared to, like, we're still talking the language of the 1980s, and I think we need to move on. We saw productivity starting to collapse in the 1980s, and we've ignored it ever since. And we keep on saying the same things in the last 30, 40 years about how we organize our economy and how we make productive stuff. And I agree with you, Nicholas, that there was a hope that information technology would reverse that trend, but it hasn't, which means to me that it is likely that it is not the technology itself which is the cause of this. It's the way we organize our society, which luckily is easier to fix, but in theory, at least.
So with that being said, I want to jump in to make sure Peter has a chance too. I know he's a part of the discussion as well, so we've all had a chance to chat at this point. But gentlemen, let's speak as founders here. We're all founders, once currently or looking forward to it in the future. But with all this being said, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're experiencing as founders right now, and looking ahead to the next 6 months? We had a few discussions about this yesterday around VCTV, and the idea of growth capital to finding new team members to distributed teams, and we're going to come back to distributed teams. But just for the three of you, what are you seeing as your biggest challenge right now as founders, looking forward to the next 6 to 12 months? Peter, I'm going to start with you, because Jorn and Nicholas and I have talked too much. This is all for you to start, and we'll come back.
All right. Well, thanks for that. So this may sound like overly simplistic, but the biggest challenge that really I'm facing as a company, and most of the cannabis industry is facing, is just funding. Is just simply raising money. And I think it was Joran who said it, or no, I think it was Nicholas actually, who was saying that the people that have money right now are the ones that are doing well and surviving, and the ones that didn't have a big reserve of cash are the ones that are suffering. And they're laying off people, they're making hard choices, they're changing strategies, they're pivoting. And so LeafWire was in the middle of a fundraising round when the pandemic hit. We had raised about 50% of the money. We were raising pretty quickly. All of a sudden, come end of January, it dried up. And the reason I bring that up is yesterday was the first time I successfully got a new investment in, and it's been 6 months. So the last investment I got was in January, and then this literally yesterday. And I will say, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've probably been having calls with probably 3 to 4 times as many investors, and a lot of them are like the second, third, fourth calls. That it seems like people are, I don't know if there's some sort of switch that's been flipped, or if this is going to be industry wide, but it feels as if money is starting to come back in, that people are starting to get over that initial fear, that people are realizing like, okay, this is the way the world is, and it might be like this for a year, 2 years, longer. So if we're investors, 6 months ago, we need to get back on and just continue the course of what we were doing. So I think that initial couple months of fear is hopefully gone. We'll see what happens to the economy over the next couple of months, but anecdotally for us, we've seen an uptick of 3 or 4 times as many calls with investors and actually got money in the door. So it's the first time we've had someone actually put money in for 6 months. And we're hoping that kind of shows like a real change right now. So we'll see, but that for me and for most of our industry is really the biggest challenge right now.
Yeah, and I've heard that from a few others in the cannabis space particularly, but just in general, I think we talk again a lot here on VCTV with investors about where money is and isn't, and what's being deployed and what really is being deployed. And I think you're calling it out, right? The first few months of 2020 was very focused on, hemorrhaging and making sure that your current portfolio was taken care of, and now investors are seeing that way of life move past. Companies have figured things out or not, right? And are still going, but now they can start taking on maybe new opportunities a little bit slower from what we've talked about on previous episodes. But I think you're calling it out in the cannabis space just right, as I think this is going to be becoming a trend going forward. We're going to get back on track as well. So thank you for sharing. It's hard. Crossed. Fingers crossed. We've got about 8 investors on after us here today, so I'll call them out and see if I can get anything else further for you. But nonetheless, thank you for sharing that as a founder. These are things that are tough to share, and I know our audience is appreciating this as well. So, Joran, to you as a founder, aside from the obvious we've already talked about, what are you seeing as kind of your biggest struggle and biggest challenge going forward?
I think it's particularly in our industry, is the continued uncertainty. I think there are opportunities, and I'm talking not so much for my business, but for other people in the event and ticketing business. I think there are lots of opportunities there to be taken because people are suffering, and so there is a selection process going on, and so if you have opportunities there to invest and to, particularly I think for for acquisitions, I think there's the potential of doing some good deals. But you'd have to convince people that this time next year people will be back in doing these things. So I think there are opportunities out there. I think also as with any technology sector, there are cycles of replacement, and I find that there are a lot of people still have pretty old technology going on, and so there's again there's still opportunity to make things better. The world is weird at the moment because at the same time, we have negative interest rates and billions of dollars being created in quantitative easing. So there's lots of money going around. I think the problem is how do you match the enormous amount of money that's out there versus the real opportunities that are there in terms of investing and making things better. And I think
it sounds like we're almost at it. Yeah, it sounds like we're at this inflection point, right? Where technology is very advanced in some cases, but we're trying to make it further advanced. And our products and services, we're trying to integrate that technology and make them better and more efficient. And then as consumers, we're trying to use all of that, but the infrastructure may not be there for us to have it live up to the hype, right? And then I think there's still a very big separation. And even you bring up government and enterprise, so I'll call those out at a high level. It's like there's a lot changing. This has been touted, you know, as a very transformative, not to buzzword out here, but decade ahead for us as a global society, because so many things have kind of reached the point. I mean, I've talked to many about the year of singularity, right? A fun question I like to throw out there. And what most of our guests have said as those that are investing in this deep technologies is we're already in it. We're already living it. That we're not looking towards the future of a point of singularity, that we're actually already in it, that so many things are rapidly changing as we go, that it's just all happening at once, which is a very hard thing to handle for many, both on all sides, right? Consumers to enterprise to governments to us as founders and investors. It's a mixing, melting, dramatically large, elephant-sized, mouse-sized pot of changes. But with that, Nicholas, I want to make sure I get to you because we're about to come to the lightning round and wrap up. So what are you seeing as your biggest challenge?
Yeah. So we go a bit like Peter. I think funding is our biggest challenge. We had a very rocky second quarter when the COVID burst. In fact, we saw an acceleration of our activities, and we are early in the ramp up of our commercial ramp up. So we have been very busy onboarding new customer, onboarding a new project to support and financing. What we were planning to be very busy fundraising, and so it was a good problem. But we also noticed that the fundraising activity went very silent for a few months. I think investor was trying to take care of their portfolio, as you mentioned, and also try to figure out who are the good bets post in the COVID time versus the less good bets, and try to understand what does that mean for their investment strategy and thesis moving forward. So I think what we would like to do as a company is to definitely be able to secure the resources, the financial resources we need in order to continue our upward trajectory, acquiring new customer and project, and keep our growth that we have seen in the last 10 months. And today we are in a tricky situation where we may have to make a very hard decision, you know, where leave this growth trajectory because we are not able to finance it. And I think that's the last things you want to do as a founder, because you have the feeling that you are not grabbing the opportunity that is that you have built for yourself and that is lying in front of you. So that's our main challenge right now.
And it stunts growth, right? It makes you make decisions on where things go and where things don't. But I completely agree. And again, thank you guys for sharing that. So lightning round, we got about 5 minutes. So I want to wrap up with one big question and closing thoughts, and we'll get to where everyone can find you. And you know, earlier this week we had it's only Tuesday, so yesterday we had a conversation around the future of work and remote technologies. Something everyone talks about. We're all going to be working from home. We know that may not be true for every industry and for every individual, et cetera. But one big overarching theme that has been said is the idea of global talent. That now in the world that we're currently living in and going forward, that the idea of hiring the best talent anywhere at any time is now much more accepted. And so the question to each of you, really quick answers, is distributed teams. So teams in different countries, different states, spread throughout. Is this something that's here to stay, and is it something that you're interested in, or is it just a fad and we're not going to see anything happen with it? Peter, I saw you unmute first, so go ahead. Distributed teams, yes or no?
Yes. So our tech team's in Sri Lanka. So we've had an offshore tech team for the last 2 years. So we're already doing that. The rest of my team, there's only a couple of us. We've been remote the whole time. So I have a sales guy across the country, my partners in Colorado, some other people in California. So I mean, we've done this the whole time and will continue. And I love the idea of being able to harness talent worldwide. And I think this, makes it even more likely that, that seems like a more possible now, I think, than ever.
I love it. Nicholas.
Yeah, I think not only possible, but accepted. I think, we have been running a very virtual team for 3 years. Our tech team is in Ukraine. We are based in Singapore. We have people in Vietnam, in India. Some part of our tech team is in New York. So we are used to work like this, and it's our daily activity, and we are happy. And we imagine the growth of the company being like this, add key people in some key markets and remain a very distributed team. But I always had the feeling that some people were looking at us like, what is weird people? Like this 20 team already global, no headquarter, no core team. But the same people know after 3 months or 4 months in lockdown and working with their team virtually, there is an acceptance that you can be productive and you can achieve things remotely. So some people don't like it and will never like it, clearly. But I think the fact that you can be productive and that you can have a good output as a team by being virtual is becoming truly accepted, and I think it's a great thing, and I'm really happy about this.
Absolutely. Jorn, super quick, your thoughts on this as well.
If distributed teams is the singularity, then it started 5 years ago and everybody missed it. We've been doing it for 5 years. It's the new normal. It's actually kind of like, I think there's just two, because I'm actually setting up a new business at the moment, which is more in the energy sphere and things like that. And we are doing it completely distributed. But there's two things that I think are important for distributed teams. One is that trust. You need to make sure that everybody, and that has to do with the way you set up your organization, the values that you apply in the organization. And I think I'm going to come back to my earlier point, which is productivity. And productivity is something that you reach by working less, not more. And I think one of the key challenges of distributed teams is allow people to work a lot less, because I think that's the key to success.
There's a very big conversation being had this week in particular around this topic, and the idea of that overworked fatigue, where people may be more productive as individuals, as companies, as societies, but there's also now a big crash and burn that's starting to happen, and a little bit of burnout. So make sure you take your breaks, founders that are out there. It's okay. Go for a walk, get outside. It is okay to take a break for a few minutes from screen time. Guys, with that being said, we are at the time. So I want to make sure everyone gets a quick second in for a shout out of where everyone can find you online and your companies, because each of you are doing something very exciting and people should want to connect with you. So Nicholas, Jorn, Peter is last. Nicholas, where can everyone find you online?
Well, I think the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active and I try to answer. We have an amazing website which explains what we do, positiveenergylimited.com. And reach out. There is a small chat, and behind the chat, there is often one of the co-founders, so don't hesitate to interact with the chat, and we will be happy to explain more in detail what we do. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you as well, Nicholas. Jorn.
Seeds.io is the business where I work in now, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, and I'm not on Twitter. I've given up on that. Too much waste of time. So that's it.
No worries. Peter, same to you. Where can everyone find you and the company online?
Sure. Well, of course, I would urge everyone to come join leafwire.com. It's It's free to create a profile. You can learn about the cannabis industry, look for jobs, etc. If you want to contact me directly, you can do that on LeafWire or peter@leafwire.com. And I'm happy to chat with anyone who wants to learn a little more about the industry or about LeafWire and kind of our funding rounds. I'll always happy to talk to people about that as well. So feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for coming on today as founders and sharing and being so open and vulnerable with everything that's happening in your industries and also some of the challenges that you are facing right now. I know, again, our audience appreciates it. And thank you to our audience for tuning in today. If you like what you heard, make sure to give us a thumbs up, click the subscribe button. This edition of Startup Roundtable was today, but we have many more coming up. And so get your questions in. Feel free to reach out to join us. Thank you to Lena and to the entire LA Token team for making this edition of VCTV's Startup Roundtable possible. I'm Kyle Lacotte, your host. You can find me on LinkedIn and everywhere on the web at Kyle Lacotte. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon to talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence, AR, VR, and what's happening in all those spaces. Gentlemen, have a great day. Audience, we'll be back here in about